Hello, Minnesota Studies. Today's video, if you're in my Avid class, you already saw this photo, but I thought I'd show a picture of a softball field. As I told you, today we'd be at a softball tournament, so here's a picture of the fields. And I know that I sent my picture of the beach yesterday, so some of you might say, ooh, this is cool. Some of you might say, I'd rather see the beach. So we'll see what I send out tomorrow. But today I want to go over work that we had from yesterday. So first, we already know that if you are missing anything from chapter 9, that's still something that you want to work on. So I'm going to get out of Avid real quick, and we'll go into our Minnesota Studies. And if I go to the grade book, once again, I'll go over all of this with you. But both your Chapter 8 and your Chapter 9 comprehension should be submitted. You should have taken your Chapter 8 and Chapter 9 end of the unit test. You should have submitted your map checkpoint 4. And you should have now had enough time to finish your U.S.-Dakota War, and that should be submitted. And then you have the 3 quizzes. But let me go over everyone in here knows what the comprehension is. Everybody here knows what the Chapter 8 test, Chapter 9 tests are. Everybody knows what your quizzes are. Let me just confirm the map checkpoint and the story of the U.S.-Dakota War. So, once again, if you go into our map, again, I'm in Avid here, so I can get out of Avid. If you go to your map, and this was in an earlier video, but we were working on this little section right here on our map. We added the Lower Sioux Agency. We added the Upper Sioux Agency. We added the 1851 and 1858 reservation. We added New Ulm, Fort Wrigley. We added Wood Lake Battlefield. We added the Cooley Battlefield. We added Mankato. So those were all the things that we put in our map. So then, when you submit your map, it should look something like this. This is an ongoing map. In fact, this is map checkpoint 4, and that's where you were to submit this. So once you have this all done, and it should be done by now, this map should be submitted to Schoology. Okay? So you need to do that. The second thing I want to talk about is in your Chapter 9, and this was your U.S.-Dakota War as told by you. So I know there's been some miscommunication on this, so I want to try to hopefully clarify this right now. So what you were to do is to look back through the pages of Chapter 9. So we added some new pages, which was 188 to 193 in your hardcover, or 9.25 to 9.29 in your online book. And so it just gave you a few more people in this war. But then you were to look back, and you were to look at some of the individuals that were in this chapter. Andrew Myrick, Thomas Galbraith, Stephen Riggs, Henry Sibley, Mary Chavant, Bishop Whipple. And then, of course, we had individuals like Little Crow, Big Lake, Wounded Man, Lorenzo Lawrence. And you were to pick 3 of these, okay? Learn a little bit more about what side of this war would they be on. Would they be more sympathetic to the early settlers, or would they be more sympathetic and understanding of the Native American side? Okay, what pieces of evidence can you find to support what you believe? So if you believe that, for example, Bishop Whipple was on the side of the Native Americans, what information could you find on it? Well, if you look in the book, you would find that it was Bishop Whipple who went to Abraham Lincoln and said, listen, we need to reopen this case. The Native Americans are not being treated fairly. So there's proof that he was on their side. Stephen Riggs, Henry Sibley. If you say Henry Sibley was in favor of Native Americans, well, I would ask, what kind of proof can you find on that? Okay, and you'll find in this chapter very little, if any, proof. He was the one that basically hunted them down and believed that they needed to be exterminated. So after you pick 3 people, you're going to imagine that you're interviewing them and asking them some questions. And then this is where you're going to have to kind of elaborate a little bit, embellish, or make up a story. What do you think they would answer, knowing what side that they were on? What questions would you ask? How would they answer it? And then you're going to write a short story, okay? And you're going to imagine that you're a newspaper writer for Faribault Daily News, and you're going to create a story about 150 words, no more than 200, and then you're going to write that, type it up in Notability, and then submit it, okay? And you're going to submit it to My Story of the U.S. Dakota War. So you get to be creative in your writing here. Remember, one of the things that we really want to do at Faribault Middle School is become better writers. So pick 3 people, find supporting evidence, a letter, something that was written in the book, use the section that says in their own words, and use that information to help you write. Now, a good writer will quote people. So yeah, you can take things directly from the book, but you have to credit who would say it. So if you think Stephen Riggs would say something, then put it in quotations, like you are interviewing him. So I want you to have fun with this project. Don't get too stressed out over it, okay? It's more of a enhancing project, enhancing our knowledge of the U.S. Dakota War. At the same time, it's given us a little bit more practice in writing. Okay, so that's your goal with this assignment. Don't make it any more difficult than that. I really want you to keep this simple. Okay, if you do have specific questions, please send me an email. All right, so that's the second part. Okay, now yesterday I gave you an assignment or a question, and it was you were to look at your book, look at the video in the book. It was about 3 minutes, and then read through the first section and why were new settlers choosing to move to Minnesota in the years following the Civil War and the U.S. Dakota War. So let's go take a look at our book here. And I'm going to go to Chapter 10, Sodbusters. And we're going to look at this first chapter. So it says, by the mid 1860s, Minnesota was emerging from the turbulent times. The turbulent times meant those 2 major conflicts, the Civil War and the U.S. Dakota War of 1862. They had both ended now. The attention was returning to immigration and settlement, taming the land, as they would say. So the new wave of settlers were pushing into Minnesota, and these newcomers were lured here. They came here because they were promised abundant, productive, and very cheap, or I like the word inexpensive, land. There was a wide mix of people. Americans from other parts of the United States. There were Canadians, Swedes, Norwegians, Germans, Irish, English, and many of them were poor. And they had never owned a home. Remember, people that leave their homeland, it's usually not because they're from paradise. They're experiencing hardships, and most of the people that came here, they came here because they didn't have money, they didn't have land, they didn't have a home. And they saw Minnesota as the land of opportunity. This is where they could make a living, raise a family, be successful. And most of these newcomers believed the state was headed toward a time of peace and prosperity, good fortune, in other words. And this prosperity was largely based on agriculture. Southern and western Minnesota appeared to be superb. I would say near flawless or perfect farming country. The land was flat, relatively flat. It had an incredibly rich soil, and it could support many different kinds of crops. It had just about everything going for it except one thing. It hadn't been, and you can see the word here in quotations, broken yet. Before settlers could plant any crops, they would have to cut through the sod to get to the rich soil. Now, sod is grass that grows and then dies, and it makes this big matted mess. So you can imagine if you never mowed your lawn, how long that grass would get. And then in the winter, when it gets cold, that grass all dies. And then the next year, grass grows, dies. Grass grows, dies. So there is layers and layers and layers and layers of this grass that had died, and it makes the soil really, really good underneath, but it's really hard to cut through that sod. You can see the picture down at the bottom. There's There's 6 ox there in a blade, a single blade. This was exhausting work. They would work from sun up till sundown, plowing through that soil. Really hard stuff, okay? Tall grass covered the unbroken prairie land, and these grasses had very heavy, tangled roots. It was called sod. For thousands of years, the sod had fed plants that gave food and shelter to insects, birds, and animals. Those, in turn, had made life possible for the people in Minnesota. This thick sod also protected the soil beneath it, and it stored water during the dry seasons, which made this soil underneath such great farming land. Okay? So, if we go back to our question now, the question is, why were new settlers choosing to move to Minnesota? Pretty simple. They were coming here because settlers, you know what, I'm going to change the font color here so I can mix it up. Settlers were, if you think about this, they were lured. Remember when it said that in the paper, right? They were lured by the promise of abundant. Kind of like that word. Abundant means a lot, right? Abundant, productive, abundant, productive. And I'm not going to use the word cheap, but I'm going to use the word and inexpensive land. That's simple. Okay? That's why they were coming here. All right? I'm going to add something here. Many believed that Minnesota was, heading towards a time of peace and prosperity. Peace and prosperity. This was largely based on what we call farming. The real word is agriculture. Okay, so agriculture is A-G R-I, well, here you go, R-I-C-U-L-T-U-R-E. Okay, so there's your, I should fix promise, huh? So again, that was one of the reasons, okay? The main reason. Today, what you're going to look at now, after you've done all those other things that we've talked about, is you're going to look at the section in your books, it's called Starting Small in Lincoln County, and the changes on the farm. So, in each box below represents a different type of farming. So you're going to describe each type. And if you want, you can draw what you think these farms might look like. So I kind of like that when we do that. So what do you think subsidized farming looks like? What do you think diversified farming looks like? And that might be something that you want to add into your vocabulary. Okay, so let's leave this for a moment. Let's go to Schoology. Let's get out of Schoology. Let's go back to our history book. So today what you're going to look at is you're going to look at this part right here that says Starting Small in Lincoln County in September of 1878. So you're going to continue to read this or listen to this, but you're going to go through the family of the Tainters and more settlers that are arriving. So you can see that there's quite a bit of reading for this. Okay, you'll also notice that there are going to be some vocabulary words. Subsistence farming and did I already pass diversified farming here? Subsistence farming is here on page 6. And then diversified farming. You know what? I don't want you to add that one. I'm sorry. let's not add that one yet. It's pretty far. So it's just subsistence farming. Okay, again, the practice of producing enough food to feed one's own family, but not enough to sell at market. So you're going to do some reading, starting small in Lincoln County, and you're going to take that all the way to changes on the farm. Stop at changes on the farm. Okay. My goodness. Yeah, I want to talk a little bit more about that tomorrow. I don't want to give too much today because I know some of you have some other things to finish. So you'll probably just get part of question number 2 done. Okay, so going back now, after you're reading that, your goal today is to answer question number 2. Okay, what is subsistence farming? You might not even get to diversified farming yet. Just what is subsidized farming? And so after you add that in a little picture, you should also, in Notability, your notes and vocabulary. Yeah, that's an added thing there. We'll get rid of that. Add to your vocabulary, add subsistence farming. Okay, SUBSIST. There it is. Subsistence farming. Add that to your notes. And of course, the definition. Okay, the definition to subsistence farming. If you have any questions, please send me a note. And if not, I will send out your new video tomorrow. I'm sorry, it's getting late here, and I'm losing my train of thought. So I'm going to cut it off now, and I will talk